The year was 1859, and the small Kansas town, nestled amidst the expansive, golden plains, buzzed with the usual hum of daily life. The dusty main street, lined with wooden facades, bore witness to countless stories of the vibrant residents moving about their routines, their lives inexorably tied to the undulating rhythms of the land. Amidst this tapestry of existence, one particular day began like any other, but carried with it the imminent shadow of change. It was a time when gossip was the lifeblood of the town, flowing through the streets like the wind that swept across the prairies. Whispers traveled swiftly, on lips chapped by treacherous winds, finding willing ears, eager for morsels of intrigue. On this day, however, the whispers converged on a single, startling rumor. The preacher, Jonathan Brooks, had left town unexpectedly, and the hush that followed was palpable. His absence cast a long shadow, leaving behind Abigail Brooks, his wife, who would soon find herself at a crossroads of her own making. Abigail was a woman of quiet dignity, her beauty understated but undeniable, her presence often felt more than seen. Life with Jonathan had been a journey of faith and devotion. She knelt beside him in prayer and stood beside him in life. Together, they had sustained a small congregation, tending to the spiritual needs of the community as dutifully as the farmer tends to crops. But Jonathan's sudden departure unraveled the fabric of their existence, exposing Abigail to a harsh glare of scrutiny. The town was abuzz with speculation, and the whispering chorus swelled, the echoes of adultery beginning to ring in the air. The word was a stone cast into the tranquil waters of Abigail's life, creating ripples that built into waves, threatening to drown her without mercy. The weight of the townspeople's judgment descended upon her, heavy and unrelenting. Gathered near storefronts and beneath the awnings of their homes, the women kept their distance, their prior warmth cooling to brisk acknowledgment at best. Their eyes, once companions in shared discourse, now flitted with suspicion. The men, too, shifted their gaze upon her, not with consideration but with prejudice masked by cordiality. With Jonathan's absence, Abigail found herself a creature trapped in aspic, her every movement scrutinized. Yet she bore the burden with an unbowed spirit. Every day, as she walked past the local dry goods store or the post office, she held her head high, trying valiantly to ignore the scrutinizing stares that followed her like a shadow. Abigail's world became increasingly smaller, her connections within the community severed or diminished, yet she held on. Her heart echoed with confusion and hurt, but beneath the tumult, a fierce resolve began to simmer. For Abigail Brooks, there was no alternative but to wait. Each passing day, a prayer for truth, to find light in a town shrouded in assumption. As the week waned, the whispers did not. They carried rumors of imagined liaisons, of lonesome nights, seeking comfort in the arms of another. Her denials, like wisps of smoke in a storm, were swept away, leaving Abigail feeling painfully exposed to the elements of betrayal. Yet, amidst the turmoil, Abigail's refuge remained her home, modest abode that had once been a sanctuary of shared dreams and whispered secrets with Jonathan. Now it stood as a bastion of her solitude, each room a reminder of absence and the knowledge that she must navigate this moment alone. Within those walls, she often sat in the quiet of dusk, her heart heavy but her spirit unyielding. Days passed with monotonous patience, every tick of the clock punctuating her silent prayer, until one evening, just as the horizon was painted in hues of orange and violet, an unexpected visitor came to her door. It was Jesse, an old friend of Jonathan's, bringing with him revelations that would cut through the fog of uncertainty. What Jesse shared was a tale almost too wild to believe, yet the kernel of truth was undeniable. Jonathan had not simply left, he had fled, abandoning his parish in pursuit of a life far removed from the one he had cultivated with Abigail. He had joined a group of outlaws, seeking fortune on the other side of the law, leaving a trail of broken trust in his wake. With this revelation, Abigail stood at the edge of a precipice, her reality shifting and reshaping. The knowledge was a balm and a wound, alleviating her from the cloak of blame, yet injecting a fresh brand of betrayal. In that moment, Abigail Brooks stood at the beginning of a path uncharted, her future refracted through the prism of unexpected freedom, and the daunting task of reclaiming her life amid the chaos Jonathan had left behind. And thus, as the sun sank beneath the plains, its flickering tendrils a final kiss of warmth, Abigail's heart steeled with new resolve. She would rise above the whispers, the scorn and judgment. armed not with weapons of war, but with the quiet strength that had always been her armor. She would find her way, and come dawn, Abigail Brooks would step into the world not as the preacher's wife, but as a woman of her own making, ready to face her destiny. In the heart of Kansas, 1859, when the sun dipped low and cast long shadows over the plains, the chatter of cicadas was drowned by the murmurs of a town united in judgment. The preacher's wife, whose name was Martha, found herself standing on the precipice of society's scorn. Her life had once been filled with the gentle rhythms of the community, harmonized by church bells and Sunday suppers, yet now, those same bells tolled with an ominous note, ringing not a blessing but a stark reminder of her isolation. The town was small, a cluster of wooden structures huddled against the vast expanse of prairie. In such a place, news traveled fast, and tales twisted faster. Martha's husband, the preacher, had vanished, leaving a void filled by dangerous rumors. Whispers lingered in the air as townsfolk passed by her modest home. The women, once her confidants, now sneered behind their bonnets, whispering of moral decay. The men, eyes narrowed with suspicion, scrutinized her every move. The accusation of adultery simmered, a poison spreading through the town's veins. Martha bore it silently at first, her pride and innocence coiling tightly within her. She recalled the abruptness of her husband's departure, his parting words veiled in cryptic promises of return. In his absence, doubt crept into her heart, but never did she stray from her marriage vows. Yet, the absence of evidence to quell the accusations only emboldened her critics. Martha's days became a trial of endurance. Once greeted with warmth, she found herself iced by averted gazes and hollow kindness. At church, where her husband had stood in righteous authority, she now felt every glance upon her, as though she were a heathen in her rightful place. Gossip seeped into the spaces she occupied, every shadow whispering her supposed sins. An incident at the general store exemplified the town's disdain. Martha entered, cautious yet determined, to buy provisions. Silence greeted her, a cold, palpable thing. The shopkeeper, Mr. Harmon, who once complimented her husband's sermons, hesitated before serving her. His reluctance was a knife at her chest, a reminder that her currency, her worth, was being evaluated on scales tipped unfairly. "Morning, ma'am," he muttered, barely meeting her eyes. Martha nodded, placing coins on the counter with deliberate calm. She felt the weight of the other patrons' stares, their silent judgments crawling over her skin like ants. She gathered her goods and fled, dignity battered but intact. Despite the turmoil, Martha found solace in solitude. Her home, a sanctuary where she could breathe free from scrutiny. She took solace in the whispered prayers she offered at night, clinging to the hope that truth, buried deep and dormant, would someday surface. In the evenings, she sat by the window, watching the town settle into dusk. Her thoughts drifted to the life she once had, where trust and companionship formed the pillars of her existence. She mourned not just the absence of her husband, but the erosion of community ties, each severed thread a testament to the fickle nature of human allegiance. Desperate not to be engulfed by despair, Martha reached within herself, drawing on reserves of strength she scarcely knew she possessed. Resolve blossomed alongside her loneliness, a fiery companion that refused to be extinguished by society's icy rebuke. Her determination bore fruit in subtle defiance. Martha attended church not as one disgraced, but as a woman seeking communion with her God, unashamed and resolute. Her hymns, though haunted by sorrow, rose with unwavering conviction. Each note defied the rumors, a sonorous declaration of her innocence and faith. Her greatest challenge came when faced with the baying crowd's hunger for spectacle. A town meeting was called, ostensibly to address the affairs of the community, yet Martha knew she was the true agenda. She debated attending, fearing the vitriol that awaited her. But courage, fueled by the knowledge of her truth, propelled her forward. The meeting hall buzzed with anticipation, a hive of eager eyes and whispered conjecture. Martha entered with her chin held high, a lone figure stepping resolutely into the lion's den. Murmurs ceased as she took her place, and the leader of the town council, Mr. Thorne, stared at her, a frown etched upon his weathered face. "Mrs. Gray," he began, voice carrying a tone of wearied authority, "there have been concerns regarding your conduct in the absence of your husband." Martha met his gaze evenly, her expression unwavering. "I am aware of what is said," she replied softly, yet with a clarity that cut through the room. "But you judge me without evidence, without understanding. A rustle of dissent rippled through the room, but Martha continued, her voice steady and clear. "You speak of morality, of virtues, yet you stand quick to condemn without proof. My life, my actions, are between me and my Lord. I ask not for your approval, only your fairness." Her words hung in the air, a challenge to the status quo. Silence, thick and broiling, settled over the room, and for a moment, the weight of collective guilt bore down on the townspeople. They shifted uneasily in their seats, confronted by the stark truth of their rush to judgment. As the meeting adjourned, there was no sudden reversal, no dramatic outpouring of support. Change, Martha understood, would not come swiftly, but she had planted the seed of doubt in their certainty, a small victory in a battle that was far from over. Martha left the hall with her head held high, the road ahead still fraught with challenges, but she was not defeated. In the crucible of judgment, she discovered not only fortitude, but the power of her voice. The preacher's wife was no longer defined by his absence, but by the fierce spirit that refused to be cowed by narrow-minded prejudice. In the days that followed, Martha continued to walk the streets of her town, her presence a reminder of resilience. She knew her journey toward acceptance and justice was only beginning, but she armed herself with patience, faith, and the unyielding conviction that truth would ultimately triumph. Her story, still unfolding, became a beacon for others, a testament to the indomitable strength that lay beneath the surface, waiting to rise from the ashes of unjust condemnation. Under the pale blue skies of Kansas, the truth unfurled with the force of a gathering storm. The town, until then gripped by a self-righteous frenzy, was about to face the uncomfortable reality of its own naivety. The preacher, thought to be a pillar of faith and morality, had vanished not towards a noble mission, but deeper into shadows, enshrouded by dishonor. He had deserted his small congregation, opting instead for a lawless voyage with a notorious band of outlaws. News traveled at the pace of a prairie fire across the cobbled streets and dusty trails. It was the kind of revelation that demanded more than mere curiosity. It seized the souls of the townspeople, rattling the bars of their judgmental cages. Conversations ceased, mid-sentence, breaths were drawn sharply, as if the very air held its own bitter taste of betrayal. For some, it was a moment of disbelief so potent it bordered on painful. At the heart of this maelstrom stood the preacher's wife, long subjected to the silent accusations and stares of her community. She mustered a composed exterior, but inside, her heart quaked with the tremors of an unraveling oxymoron. The faithful man who had turned rogue, the very foundation of her life that she had painstakingly defended, was crumbling, and yet her resolve stood undaunted, like a solitary tree against a relentless wind. As the town buzzed with the startling revelation, the expected outpouring of sympathy was found wanting. The whispers, softer now, shifted direction. But the damage of months spent in isolation could not be undone with mere pity or belated understanding. Her solitude had sharpened her senses, refined her intuition. Gone was the woman shackled by societal dictates. The truth had set her free in an unexpected way. There was power in knowing that she owed nothing to the perceptions that had cast her as the antagonist of this tale. Her heart, while bruised, burned with a renewed sense of purpose. She understood now that her journey was no longer just a quest for personal vindication. It was about establishing her own identity beyond the shadows of another's deeds. With the scales of justice tipped, the preacher's wife presented herself anew to the world, no longer willing to be a vessel for collective scorn. Her eyes, deep and resolute, bore testament to the battles fought in silence. She greeted the whispers, now filled with curiosity rather than disdain, with a quiet dignity that ignited a reluctant admiration in many who had once judged her harshly. This transformation did not occur in a vacuum. Within the walls of her modest home, the preacher's wife reflected on the complexity of human nature, the inevitable entanglements of love and betrayal. Her sleepless nights were filled with memories, some sweet, others bitter, each a thread in the tapestry of her life. Yet, in this profound solitude, she found a sense of peace, an acceptance of the unpredictable turns her journey had taken. The silence of the night bore witness to her contemplation, each distant howl of the wind a reminder of the hardship she had weathered. In these moments, she realized that the forgiveness she sought was not from those around her, but from herself. Forgiveness for having tethered her identity to a man undeserving of her fidelity. Forgiveness for the doubt she had allowed to creep into her soul. It was in this self-forgiveness that she found the courage to envision a future unmarred by past transgressions, a future where her worth was defined by her own aspirations and achievements. Armed with the knowledge unearthed by adversity, the preacher's wife resolved to move forward, to let the lessons of betrayal and assumptions shape but not dictate her path. Her heart carried the sunlight of a new dawn, illuminating the way for others who might find themselves similarly cast aside by misplaced judgment. The town, adjusting to this new narrative, began to look upon her not with scorn but with a burgeoning respect, acknowledging the tenacity with which she had navigated the storm. In her story, they found a reflection of their own vulnerabilities, their own capacities for error and redemption. And so, as truth echoed across the dusty plains, the preacher's wife emerged as both a survivor and a beacon of strength, standing tall in defiance of a moral reckoning that had nearly consumed her. In her journey from scorned to revered, from doubted to certain, she discovered her own voice, strong and unwavering, to carry her through the untamed frontiers of the Wild West, her legacy forever etched in the annals of its history. In the heart of Kansas, as the winds of 1859 continued to sweep over the plains, the preacher's wife found herself at a crossroads. Her once predictable life had been upheaved by scandal and betrayal, leaving her with a choice: succumb to the narratives cast upon her, or rise above the ashes to reclaim her dignity. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold as she stood on the porch of her modest home. The shadows of judgment were long, but so too was her resolve. With each passing day, her conviction grew. She would no longer let others dictate her story. Memories of her husband's betrayal still haunted her under the starlit sky. She could see his face clearly, the preacher who had once promised fidelity and faith, only to abandon both for the lawless thrill of outlaw life. How it had stung, learning of his truth, realizing her penance was paid for sins that weren't hers to bear. Yet in this painful revelation lay her liberation. The epoch of mourning ended with the dawn of a new intention. She would not let the shadows of a man who'd been more spectre than spouse define her future. The preacher's wife, once demure and defined by the boundaries of her marital identity, began to forge a path laden with purpose and self-determination. It was time for the reconstruction of her life, anew with intention and force. She began this transformation in the quiet hours of the night, planning step by step. The thought of crafting her destiny was both exhilarating and daunting. As she lit the flame of her lantern, she envisioned each plan as a spark of hope against the encroaching darkness of repute and reputation. Her first task was to reclaim the sanctity of her home. With vigor, she repaired the creaky doors and worn fences, each nail driven into the wood a declaration of her fortitude. The townspeople watched her toil with a mix of curiosity and contempt, yet gradually, that disdain turned into grudging respect for the woman who refused to be broken. Next, she turned her attention to financial independence. It was rare for women of the time to run businesses on their own, but rarity was far from impossibility. She set about crafting goods to trade at the marketer, humble beginning undoubtedly, but one that promised foundations. Her deft hands spun stories of resilience into each woven basket and knitted shawl. Through trade, she engaged with those few sympathetic townsfolk who dared see beyond the veil of bygone scandal. One poignant afternoon, as she bartered her wares in the bustling market, a young woman approached, inspiration gleaming in her youthful eyes. "Will you teach me?" the girl asked tentatively, her voice a whisper amidst the noise of clinking coins and haggling voices. The preacher's wife paused. In the girl, she saw herself nod, the self torn by disgrace, but the self emboldened by opportunity. "Yes," she replied, her tone firm and unwavering. "Together, we'll learn." This budding mentorship fostered a community among the womenfolk, slowly turning the tide against oppressive societal norms. They met in small groups, away from prying eyes, fostering an environment of growth and mutual support. As the whisper grew into a roar, more women joined, each seeking the wisdom to navigate a world bound by rigid expectations. Conflict was inevitable, as some viewed this assembly as an affront to the established order. Yet, every attempt to silence them was met with the unyielding spirit the preacher's wife championed. Through perseverance and unity, they learned that strength was not merely the fortune of the mighty. It was within the steady hands that crafted, the shared laughter over simple meals, and in the determination reflected in their eyes. One day, a voice of dissent rang louder than the rest. challenging her leadership and the very essence of their collective. She faced this confrontation with a steady heart. "I do not seek to dismantle," she addressed the crowd. "I seek to build upon foundations cracked by mistreatment. Knowledge and independence are our hammers. Let us craft better lives, not just for us, but for those who will follow." Her speech was met with silence at first, then growing applause, as the understanding set in their battle was not against their community, but rather towards forging understanding within it. As time passed, her story spread beyond the confines of their town, painting her as a symbol of turning tides amidst the tumultuous landscape of the Wild West. Tales of the preacher's wife flourished, entwining with the fabric of every woman shackled by prescribed roles, a beacon of hope, illuminating paths charted by courage and conviction. Thus, she emerged from the ashes, not only vindicated but cherished. Her saga told with reverence across the plains she called home. Her legacy was neither in the scandal she endured, nor in her abandoned title, but in the strength and solidarity she nurtured. The preacher's wife who became an emblem of defiance, heralding a future where justice and courage thrived side by side. In the heart of Kansas' expansive plains, the preacher's wife stood resolute, her eyes scanning the horizon as twilight swallowed the day. Her fingers lightly brushed the revolver strapped to her hip. It was more than a weapon, it was a promise of her newfound autonomy. The transformation from an unjustly scorned woman to one of power had been neither swift nor easy. Each sunrise bore a reminder of the silent scorn she had endured, the whispers that painted her a villain in the absence of her husband. She remembered the moment word spread of his abandonment with outlaws, a switch that flipped her from the accused to a woman scorned by betrayal. Her path to redemption demanding courage she didn't know she possessed. That courage ignited the fire of defiance that pulsed through her veins now. Perhaps her neighbors thought her bold posture unfeminine, but she cared little for their opinions now. She was an island of resolve amidst a sea of judgment. 2. The first test. Her resolve was put to test soon after she had declared herself unruled by their condemning eyes. One sultry evening, as she walked to the general store, something she had avoided for months, due to the stares that felt like prickly thorns, she heard the cruel laughter of some townsfolk gather behind her. They had heard of the revolver, mockingly calling her the sharpshooting sinner, a moniker meant to diminish her standing further. The ringleader, a man who had made his disdain clear from the start, stepped forward. "What are you going to do with that, darling? Shoot an outlaw preacher back to you?" he sneered, voice dripping with condescension. She halted, her back still to him, then turned slowly. Her eyes met his, unwavering, speaking volumes of the fires she had endured. The men around him shifted uncomfortably, sensing a change. "That gun's for protection, but my words are my weapon now," she replied, her voice steady yet powerful. The crowd's snickers subsided, replaced by an awkward silence. It was the first time she had faced them, not as the preacher's abandoned wife, but as her own personal woman, with more right to judgment than any of them. Their whispers faded as she continued, gracing the general store with a new aura of respect cloaked around her. 3. From within the ashes, as weeks turned into months, her presence commanded the respect she'd been denied for too long. Women who once shunned her began to look towards her with something akin to admiration, or even envy. More than a few found solace in confiding their troubles, seeking the wisdom she'd gathered from sorrow and survival. She advised them not through parable as a preacher would, but with the raw, hard-earned truth of life. Her interactions were not confined to whispers, but blossomed into gatherings in her modest parlor, where she encouraged other women to share their stories and ideas without fear of reprisal. These discussions blossomed into something unforeseen, a rally for women's rights within the oppressive confines of the harsh frontier. Each meeting built alliances, a sisterhood bound not by circumstance, but by the shared understanding of silent power. 4. Confronting the past through her newfound alliances, she became privy to information that shook her. Coran be known to her. The preacher's abandoned flock had sighted him nearby. They were convinced he was plotting a return, perhaps emboldened by the passage of time that he believed had smoothed over his transgressions. The thought sent a chill down her spine, yet there was no retreat in her resolve. A meeting convened in her home where she calmly laid out her plans. The man who had wronged her would be faced with more than a jilted wife's anger, a community, or what parts of it she could muster, ready to confront duplicity. Her heart thudded with trepidation, but she was no longer alone in her stand. 5. The resolution. It was a brisk morning when he finally arrived. bearing the same charismatic smile but now strained with desperation. He stood before the townsfolk, some of whom looked ready to welcome him, oblivious of his betrayal. But the preacher found no solace in their eyes, as his wife's unwavering gaze met his with a challenge he'd never known before. She stepped forward, flanked by the women she had inspired. "You come to a place that remembers," she said, her voice slicing the air. "We are not your congregation any longer. This town has no pulpit for a man who preaches loyalty yet lives as an outlaw." The town held its breath. His downfall was a spectacle, a shuddering of deceit that echoed in their midst. His attempts to plead and justify fell on the deaf ears of a crowd reborn. A collective decision emerged, one that saw him turned away. This time not by whisperers, but by the town's redefined code, one of justice rather than superficial morality. As he left, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in hues of gold and crimson, a fitting backdrop to the preacher's wife as she watched him vanish from her life. Relief finally opening rest her heart. Epilogue. Her journey was fraught with challenges, but it proved the tenacity that lay dormant in her spirit. Over time, her tale of resilience transcended personal vindication, evolving into a beacon of empowerment throughout the West. She, once an outcast, became legend, her name whispered not in scandal but in reverence, a tribute to courage and justice. The preacher's wife etched a legacy, her narrative woven into the fabric of the untamable wilderness, like a testament to the power of a defiant heart. The preacher's wife stood on the wooden porch under the fading amber sky, watching as the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the vast Kansas plains in hues of purple and gold. The events of the past year played through her mind, weaving a tapestry of pain, resilience, and triumph. In that quiet moment, as the crickets began their nightly serenade, she knew the time had come to redefine her story, not just for herself, but for the generations of women who would follow. The whispers that once haunted her life were silenced, transformed into murmurs of respect and awe. Her journey from scorned to celebrated was not an easy passage, riddled with moments of self-doubt and trepidation. But these obstacles only served to fortify her resolve, a testament to the spirit that had always burned quietly within her. With a deep breath, she reflected on the inception of her redemption, the moment she first bore arms not out of fear, but with a resolute determination to protect her dignity and reclaim her life. Each step along this path was deliberate, imbued with a sense of purpose and unwavering conviction. In those early days, when her name was still sullied by unfounded accusations, she took the revolver her father had given her as a child, a relic of protection that had gathered dust for far too long. The weight of it in her hand was foreign yet reassuring, symbolizing the power she now wielded over her destiny. She remembered vividly the day she stood her ground against the town's most vociferous critic, a man whose voice was as booming as his arrogance was towering. He had confronted her in the town square, his disdain evident in the sneer etched across his face. Yet, as she met his gaze, she felt no fear, only a profound sense of resolve. "Reputation isn't ownership," she had declared, her voice clear and unwavering. "It's earned through deeds, not dictated by hearsay." The crowd had stilled, the air thick with anticipation. In that silent standoff, she had claimed a victory not just for herself, but for every woman silenced by unjust judgment. The resolve in her eyes was a reflection of the battles fought within, won through grit and perseverance. As weeks stretched into months, the veil of prejudice started to lift, slowly revealing glimpses of understanding and recognition from her town. Accusations once hurled with venom became questions laced with curiosity and respect. The turning tide was palpable, energizing her with renewed vigor to rebuild not just her life, but that of her community. With a heart unburdened, she set out to transform solitude into solidarity. Her once isolated homestead became a sanctuary for women seeking refuge from the chains of societal scorn. They gathered under the sheltering boughs of the old willow tree, sharing stories of pain and healing, of loss and newfound strength. This communion of kindred spirits gradually evolved into a movement. They supported each other, crafting a network of resilience fortified by their shared experiences. The preacher's wife became their guiding light, and her vision transcended personal vindication, planting the seeds of a legacy that would flourish long after the echoes of her battles had faded. Her efforts extended beyond her immediate circle, reaching into the heart of the town she once thought of leaving. She spearheaded initiatives that championed education and empowerment, breaking the shackles that had bound women to a predetermined fate. Her projects included a schoolhouse where young girls learned skills previously deemed inappropriate for their gender, literacy, numeracy, and above all, the preacher's wife, once a target of malicious whispers, now found herself leading town meetings, her insights shaping the policies that would govern their days. These gatherings were marked not by rigid hierarchy, but as collaborations, where every voice mattered, a testament to the inclusivity she had fostered. As the town thrived, the preacher's wife took solace in the quieter moments, often watching the play of light and shadow over the vast plains from her porch. Her legacy was not written in grandiose gestures or towering monuments, but carved into the lives she had touched, reflecting her dedication to justice and compassion. Years later, as dusk settled around her, the preacher's wife felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her tale was no longer solely her own, interwoven with the stories of those who had found their voices, inspired by her defiance. Her journey from rejection to redemption had become a beacon, illuminating the path for those shackled by the constraints of an unforgiving society. And thus, the preacher's wife transcended the confines of her story, her legacy echoing across the windswept Kansas plains, forever etched in the hearts and minds of those who dared to dream for a fairer, more just world.